Welcome to another really special podcast. I'm Tisha Poncio, Digital Learning Specialist at Wakelet, and today I'm so excited to share with you my guest, Dee Lanier. Dee is an incredibly energetic and passionate educator and learner with over a decade of instructional experience on the K-12 and collegiate levels. He holds an undergraduate and master's degree in sociology with special interest in education, race relations, and equity, and he's an award-winning presenter, TEDx speaker, Google certified trainer, Google innovator, and he's a Google certified coach. Dee, welcome to the Wakelet podcast.
You know how happy I am to be here. I'm delighted. It's so good to see you.
So excited to have you. Great to have you. Can you just share with us right off the bat? Tell us, because I mean, that's an incredible bio. I try not to fangirl over like TEDx speaker, but that is a dream I've always had. I'm not sure I'll achieve that. But can you tell us your story in 6 words or less?
In 6 words or less. Okay, so let it be known to the audience, because they will feel like that felt staged. You gave me a little bit of heads up on this question.
Yes.
And I love alliteration. And so I used all P's.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always like a all P or C guy. So I used all P's. So my 6 are pursuing, providence, passionate, persuasive, problem-based, people of color.
Ooh.
So there are little mile markers in my story with every single one of those words.
Okay, repeat those for those audience members listening that are taking notes, because you know there's somebody out there taking notes just like me. So pursuing.
There's always that one person who's like, I got to get that one more time.
You know, I'm that person.
I know.
Pursuing, providence, passion.
Yep.
Problem solving.
Yep. Persuasive, then problem solving, and people of color.
Okay. I love how you just honestly, I feel like this really describes who you are. And I've known you for a really long time. And I'm not persuasive is intriguing to me, Dee. Persuasive. Now, I feel like there's a story just with that one word.
Well, it was interesting. So I'll say this. When I was using Grammarly for doing some of my transcript updating for my book, which, dang it, still didn't catch some things. Nonetheless, it gives you the option of how do you want this to read, right? Like, is this informative? Right. Is this, whatever the words are. And one of the words that stood out to me was like persuasive, because if there was any paper that I wrote that if I had the option to choose, it's I want to write a persuasive paper. Yeah. If there's any way that I want to communicate, it is persuasively. But most importantly, in my work with students and teachers, I want to be persuaded by them to understand their perspectives. And so persuasion is something that I think is most critical in education and is a very big part of just how I'm made up and how I attempt to listen to others.
I love that. And you used another P word, right? Perspective.
Yes. Oh man, how did I miss that one?
I know, that's a good one. That is a great one. Well, I want to hear from you about design thinking. Now, design thinking for me, I don't remember when I actually first heard this term, but I want you to give our audience like a backstory of that and kind of what is design thinking? What does it include? Are there stages? Are there parts? How do you believe this way of design thinking might benefit our students, and kind of how you got involved in that?
Whenever I'm speaking to audiences, I oftentimes ask the question, what do you know about design thinking? And that helps me feel the room, understand what people come into the room understanding. But here's what I've observed, and that is typically people are aware of a design thinking process that they communicate as the design thinking process. And it's typically from one or two schools of thought. One is IDEO, and the other one is Stanford D School. And so it gets spoken as if it is this definitive thing. The design thinking process is, and then I challenge the room. So I challenge your listeners as well to just do a search for design thinking models and see how many come up, right? And you will see that there are various models that exist. What they have in common are sometimes really really easy to identify. Some things like, wait, why do they have this thing versus that thing? But what I've learned over the years is that design thinking is first and foremost a mindset and not a model. And so it's design thinking, and thinking has to do with our ability to understand something. And so I always push the pause button there and say, start with the thinking part, all right? And think like a designer. So that's a partial answer to your question. And the other is sort of my journey in learning about it and then later applying a design thinking model. Happened for me as a part of Google Innovator in 2016, bringing my problem to the table and then having someone help facilitate a design thinking process with us. And at my cohort, for any of you who aren't familiar with Google Innovator, it's sort of a competitive thing to be a part of. And when you are a part of it, you are signing up for a year-long commitment to solve a big, hairy problem that exists in the educational world. And I'm still like, I need to like tweet this out. The picture of the person who gave me a book that was Design Thinking for Educators. It was very interesting. We dialogued just a little bit. She was only present, I want to say, for a couple of hours. Afterwards, she gave me the workbook and said, I feel like you need this. I feel like I should give this to you. And that kind of hits on one of those words of providence, because lots of things have happened in my life that I can't explain, but that was one of them. And that sent me on a journey of learning more about this process. And I kind of got really, really involved in it. And it comes back to again, remembering that it is thinking first, having a perspective, there's that word again, of a designer. And then the ways in which we know about design thinking typically as a model, it is a replicable process that can be used to come up with solutions to said problem. I tell teachers all the time, like if you assign a 5-paragraph essay, you are already influencing your students to think like a designer. You are telling them to write an introduction with a thesis statement, to outline the things that they want to do to prove whatever their thesis is, the body contents, and then the summary. That's a 5-step process, right? If your scientific method, it's a 5-step process. The engineering process, 5-step process. It's not that 5 steps is the process, but just note that you are employing a design thinking process whenever you are utilizing a methodology that has a start and a finish place, that has multiple steps that others can also use to come to their own conclusions on whatever issue is. So long-winded response, but I'm enamored with design thinking as thinking first, as a mindset, and different modes and modalities I'm also intrigued by.
I really love what you pointed out here, that it is a mindset, and that really starting with the thinking part of it. I use a design thinking process in my own classroom. And what I found and what I discovered, and this was just 4 years ago that I started doing this. I mean, I didn't do this my entire 21 years of education, right? I was like you, I had no idea. Once I realized what it was, I started exploring it. But what I discovered is that my students, they at first were afraid of it, right? And I think it's because these high school students were expecting a very concrete right or wrong answer. And so as I was leading them through those 5 steps, right, we were just continuously going in that circle of learning and feedback, and we just kept doing it. They realized, oh, I don't have to have it all figured out. And it's okay that I make a mistake, because
Right.
now I can go back to this part of that process.
Yes.
The circle doesn't have to always go in order. It's so intriguing to
Oh,
me because I learned that with them, right? Like I was
yes, yes,
learning
yes.
alongside them. I too thought, because of how I grew up in the education system, right or wrong answer. I mean, that's it. You either know it or you
Right.
don't. And I think the design thinking mindset, I love that you use that word instead of model. I think that our students need that so much in their lives. So, how have you seen this benefit students or teachers?
How haven't I seen it benefit students or teachers is really the question. And I don't think I have an answer to that one. So I'll attempt the first question you asked, the original question. Um, if I could even just take liberty to go into a little bit of what you said earlier, and that is that learning to be uncomfortable with not knowing the answers
Yes.
in immediately, right? And to get comfortable with saying this is discovery the entire way, and also then taking things not necessarily in order as you've gone through it, because you recognize where you are at that particular point. I would so big shout out to Liberatory Design, which I think has done a fantastic job of both really elevating the mindset of design thinking and speaking to your perspective, your personal bias, and your personal power,
Mm,
the power that you have, and being cognizant of that in a particular space. And then saying, and here's a model. Now, where are you in your needs to apply a certain thing out of this step in where you are in your design thinking process? And so I love all of that. And shout out to David Clifford, who has become a really good friend, who's one of the co-designers of Liberatory Design. How have I seen it impacting students and teachers? I would say I'm going to always start with students, because I think that
mhm.
should be our primary focus.
Sure.
You know, the whole educational system is set up to serve the needs of students, right?
Yes.
And their
Yes.
families. And so they're the ones that are most proximate to whatever pain that exists within their community. And so I'm a big social justice nerd, if you will. I am going to aim to highlight the needs that exist within the community, not by me naming them necessarily, but by listing them and allowing students to identify these are the ones that resonate with me for whatever the reason. Now, if you are passionate about solving that problem, here is a process with the community you can utilize to help solve that problem. Now, when it comes to students, though, they often identify the problems that affect them first.
Mhm.
And I am fine with that. Personally, I am fine. I'm more than just fine with it. I'm a big proponent of it. And that is
Yes.
to say, what are the problems that exist within the educational setting? Because they are the ones who are the recipients of the care that they're supposed to be receiving, right?
Yes.
They identify the problems. Now, because they are the ones who are most proximate to the pain of the problems that exist within the pedagogical setting, they are the ones to say, this is the problem, and I have ideas to help solve it.
Mm.
My role as an educator to come alongside them to facilitate a process to then be amazed and in awe of the ideas they come up with,
Yes.
as well as the creative ways of expression that they share, how those solutions can come about. Um, I have been blown away more times than I can count as students have expressed themselves freely as they've gone through a process that has codified this is this a solution we think we should try.
Mhm.
And I think that teachers should be excited about that, because if it's around how the class setting interacts, whether it be socially or instructionally, whatever solutions that those students come up with, they've already signed the social contract that we will adhere to it. We came up with that solution, right?
Yeah.
And if things aren't working, teacher can then bring it back and facilitate a discussion on what's not working. How can we design an improved system? Again, social contract is signed. They deliver the solution.
Yes.
So again, whether that be social aspects of the classroom setting or instructional, and it requires the teacher to share the power of the classroom and not wield it over the students.
Okay, I just have to write this down because I'm taking notes. But the teachers are sharing the power, is what you just said. And
Yeah.
it took me, Dee, it took me years as an educator, because in my own degree and in my own educational classes, right? You're the sage on the stage. You're supposed to have all the answers, and you're supposed to know everything, and you're supposed to be in control of everything. And it wasn't until what you said, when I got out of my own way and got out of their way and shared the power, that I started seeing the growth in my students. Because the truth is, if we aren't asking them, what are we even doing? Right? It could be something
Right.
very small, like I let my students come up with our classroom core values, and let them have a say in that. Just that alone changed everything about how my classroom worked, because they felt ownership over it and they felt empowered. And I just cannot say that enough. I love that you have hit on that, because I really do believe the design thinking process really creates space for students. And then the teachers, like you said, they're facilitating, which is really what we're supposed to be doing, not being in
Right.
control.
And we can provide wisdom because we
Yeah.
should,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
We should provide wisdom in areas in which students don't understand. Well, actually, there are long-term ramifications if we were to do that versus that, right?
Right.
Oh, I've informed, I've participated
Yes.
in the problem-solving process. I have not decided what the solution is
Right.
necessarily. And
Right.
sometimes there's an acknowledgement certain decisions have been made for us. And so our solutions have to fit within these certain
Yes.
confines, but our creativity is not necessarily limited. But I think that because we as teachers, as educators, have been conditioned in the same setting that the students have, so when you talked about in high school,
Yes.
I know it with my high school students, I recognize they are used to something. They are used to me telling them what the answers are,
Yes.
what to do next, and they're caught off guard. And in some cases, they kind of object to doing it differently originally. But once it's understood, this is, we collectively will not move forward until we buy into collectively doing things together, then we can be successful. And they're like, what is this we you keep talking about? I'm used to a system where
Yes.
everything is set up as me and I, and you teach me, I take notes, I regurgitate, you pass or fail me.
That is a perfect summary, Dee. Honestly, that's exactly what happened in my classroom. You're absolutely right about that. They sort of panicked a little bit. I will say that in those 4 years that I used design thinking, I saw so much growth in my students, but it also eased my mind as an educator that I was really preparing them for life outside of those 4 walls of the classroom. They were better prepared to have conversations with people, eye-to-eye contact, confident speaking, confident validating in their, whatever their beliefs were, having a
Yes.
conversation, even if they didn't agree with each other. Like, it
You're
really,
right.
really changed everything for them. And even some of the ones that I haven't seen in a year, I hear how well they're doing, and the
Mm,
things that they're doing. I really, I don't want to take a ton of credit, but I do think that just shifting their mindset about all of that
yes.
really contributes to their success. Well, that leads me to my next little question, because I
Sure.
actually purchased Solve in Time. So if you're listening, many of you may be familiar with Solve in Time. But if you aren't, we're going to have Dee talk a little bit about what is Solve in Time. How did you come up with this idea? What do you believe are the benefits for the learners? Now, I had my own benefits. I watched it. And what
Yeah.
ages of
Yeah.
students or people do you think this will benefit?
Sure. All right. So I'll try and respond more concisely. So I came up with design thinking all by myself because I'm brilliant. Psych. Please start laughing right now. That was a joke. Because I will say that I was learning so much about design thinking as a process. I was also frustrated by some of the language around the formal processes that I was familiar with. And I talk about this with rubrics all the time as
Mm-hmm.
well. It's like, who is that really written for? And if I
Mm-hmm.
see a multi-point rubric that has language that is on a graduate degree level, and I've developed it and said, here, fourth grader, this lets you know where you're supposed to be in the process. It's like I've confused them, I've frustrated them, I've overwhelmed them. And I was utilizing Stanford D School's process, which I really like the language of empathy, of starting with empathy, though I have some critique of that today, nonetheless. And I would teach to my students, every day is party time. That was the little acronym. And even for myself, I have to stop, pause, and say, okay, what's that process again? Every empathy, day, define the problem, is ideate, party, prototype, and T test. Okay. But even some of those words in and of themselves, I then was giving an education on terminology. And I recognized that I was creating additional problems for my students to solve instead of having them engage in the problem solving process, right? It's like, is it really important for a student to understand this word that was recently made up, by the way, called ideation, right? Does that matter? Or does it matter that they are doing it?
Yes, yes,
right?
yes.
And depending on the younger learner, right? Like helping them understand or define the word prototype. And they're like, wait, what does that mean? Okay, let's go into explaining what a prototype is. And I found myself explaining the process so frequently instead of giving them the process to follow, that my first mission was to simplify it.
Yes.
That was sort of mission one. And then I think we're all like this, right? We are products of the things that we, or we create products out of things that we have positive experiences with. And so for me, it was like hyperdocs meets inquiry-based learning meets gamification.
Yes.
And so I just had that in my mind. I want to create a gamified hyperdoc that does design thinking of sorts. But for me, starting out, it was all about app smashing because that's another sort of passion of mine. And I put it in front of third graders and fourth graders, and they loved it. It was fun just to like, and part of the process was that they had to then identify an app to use, and then they had to identify another app to use, and they smashed those two apps in order to create a solution to a problem. And I started to learn. And what I learned was that, again, the very thing that I originally said I did not want to do, I did just in a different form. And that was that I created problems within the process instead of giving them the process to problem solve.
Yes.
So the students and adults were the best actually at giving me this important feedback, were so hung up on app smashing. The problems they were solving was trying to figure out, what is Wakelet? How does Wakelet work? And then how do you utilize Wakelet with Flipgrid, right? So they were all around application problem solving.
Yes.
And I'm like, wait, your original problem got lost.
Mm-hmm.
So back to the drawing board and frequently utilizing the students that I was in front of. So for me at that time, it was third, fourth, and fifth graders, and the conferences that I attended. And so presenting in front of adults. And so recognizing the things that the students really clearly understood and enjoyed, and comparing that to what adults understood and enjoyed. And wherever there was frustration, I leaned in harder. And which was, because to me, it was, even if I wasn't articulating a design thinking process, I was always thinking like a designer. So I was like, okay, wait, tell me more. And I could tell, especially with adults, that they felt really skeptical. Like, I don't understand. So you've created a product, but you know that it has problems. And I'm like, yes, help me understand what's frustrating you. And they're like, there was a little bit more resistance, because I think that adults felt like, some, not all, wait a minute, if you present on something, it's supposed to be perfect. Students had no problem with saying, I really think this is confusing, or I really don't understand, or and I really like. And so it's just taking notes,
Yes.
and eventually came up with a process that I think was much more unified between those two perspectives, and simplified so that it's just clear and straightforward. And then lastly, gamified enough to where it was more fun and at random versus, this is the process. The process goes from here to here to here to here. And these are the activities that we do. Like I get bored easily. And so I needed to add some randomization. So the steps to solve in time are all of that to finally get to, right? So asking a question about the problem. And oftentimes that's a perspective question, right? Is this a problem that affects you? Is this a problem that affects others, right? Identifying who it affects in many ways. And then research. And that was an intentional shift from some other models to put research first, because I'm also highly passionate about equity work. And in equity work in particular, your opinion matters and my opinion matters, but they do not matter more than the perspectives of others who've actually experienced the sort of pain that the problem is related to and what the research shows about it, right? So it's not a battle of wits. Well, I think this and you think that. It's what are the perspectives of those people who have experienced it? What do they say? Their opinions matter because their experience is real. And then what does the research say? Is there research that says one thing or multiple things about that particular topic? Stop, pause, gather the perspectives of the things that really need to be gathered. And then step 3 is understand. And I mean understand not just cognitively, but emotionally. So this is the empathetic question, right? And then step 4 is the first time that I invite people who are participating to think of what's necessary in order to solve it. And so it's really around resources. What are some things, or what is a thing, or who is a person that may be helpful in helping you solve this, right? So this is all around opening people's aperture to seeing what they don't see. And then last but not least is the share card. And this is where things always get exciting for me, because I give participants the opportunity to share whatever their solution is in a creative way. So it may be a story or a poem or a song or a speech. It may be a skit or a play. It may be the option to choose, right? But things always get exciting in the room when people share out their solutions creatively. And they oftentimes, even when not asked, share their steps in the process.
I love that you've gone over this, because I really want to say I bought Solve in Time specifically for my students, and we would take once a week and we would do this. And the intriguing thing is, you said seeing what you don't see, taking time to really emotionally understand a perspective from someone else who is living that, right? And I think it was 2020, 2021 when I started this. So right around the time that everybody was having opinions about all sorts of things, but it was just sort of miraculous. I would give my students this deck of cards, right? Just like you were saying.
Yeah.
And sort of just facilitated, showed them what they could do, how that would work, and really set them on their way. And they were leading the conversations. They didn't need me to be there. And I think a lot of times adults feel like, we've already hit on this. We feel like we have to take over and we have to know all the answers, and we have to sort of like tell them what they should be thinking. But I was watching them discover each other's perspective and have such civil conversations, even if they didn't completely agree. They were able to take the research and those real life situations of students that had been in these other, they've lived it, and they could sit there and really emotionally understand. I love that you say that, because one of my questions is about empathy. And I think that we need more of this in our classrooms. I was seeing that on my way out. We just need more talk about empathy, even among educators. But I want to know from you, what's your best definition of empathy? And how do you believe it ties in with equity? You've hit on equity a little bit already. And how can educators who want to bring empathy into their classroom, how do you think they can do that?
It's a big question, because empathy requires feeling, right? And so a concise definition, I don't have one. I have many. But I'll tell you one that I've been, or a consideration, something that has impacted me a lot recently, and that is reading through Dr. Geneva Gay and her giving a uh, a difference of understanding concerning caring about someone and caring for them.
Mm.
And so I can say what empathy is not very
Mhm.
easily, and empathy is not sympathy, just feeling sorry for someone. But empathy is the ability, I think Brene
Mm.
Brown speaks about
Yes.
this, right? Of being able to at least call on your own inner resources of experience and recognize when you felt something similar, not necessarily saying that you're putting on someone else's shoes
Right.
because they don't always fit, first of all. Second of all, you can always take them off. But
Mm-hmm.
if you can, I understand grief because I have experienced grief, and I may
Mm-hmm.
not have experienced the same grief of you, but if I understand, if I recognize that you're experiencing grief, I can go in my own inner reservoir of experience and recognize I know what grief feels like. And
Yes.
so that is caring about someone in a way that is empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another, I don't necessarily want to say level because I don't want these to be used against one another because I think they work together so well, and that is to have compassion. And compassion, I think, is taken in another level of not just caring about someone but caring for them if possible. And so that actually may require doing something, and that compassion can literally be an embrace, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
that, and that's when empathy is touched, right?
Yes.
And of course it can also be times in which we do something for someone in response to the pain that they are feeling. But really, 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 like right next to it, the careful warning is to not then put to avoid centering, which is to
Mm.
say, oh, I'm going to switch whatever you said about you and make it all about me.
Yes.
And secondly, saviorism, which is to
Yes.
say, I have a solution to your problem and I'm going to give it to you in this form, whether or not you ask for it. And in me doing that, that is going to give me sort of stripes on my shoulders, pats on my back, jewels in my crown. Again, another form of centering, but almost amplified um, in self-aggrandizing. And so humility is what is necessary to respond empathetically. If you it is they are diametrically opposed if they are present in the same room.
Mm-hmm.
Arrogance and
Mm.
humility,
Mm-hmm.
or excuse me, arrogance and empathy.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Just dropping so many bombs, so many truth bombs, Dee. I knew this conversation was going to be good and deep and needed and
Sure.
helpful. And it's helping me.
And
I
you asked the
thank you.
equity question.
I did. I did. And
Yeah.
also the challenge for educators, because I do think there is a challenge, especially right now for educators. If I was still in the classroom, that I was hitting on this before I left, but your solvent time especially helped me to create some empathy among each student's story, right? And so
That's huge.
I mean I would recommend that for any teacher, but is there anything else in addition to
Sure.
how does empathy tie in with equity?
Yes, yes. And so I sort of the light touch or easy way to consider how equity and empathy can be kind of both present in utilizing a process like solving time is that it is set up to be a community process, right? It is
Mhm.
set up so that it is a shared experience instead of one that's done in isolation by a sole designer providing a solution for others instead of the people who are experiencing pain creating a solution for themselves, right? So it is a part of the process, but equity is another one of those really, really hard to define concisely words. I would say that most standard definitions get the definition wrong. So if you're like, oh, I went to dictionary.com, I went to webstersdictionary.com, I went to Collins Dictionary, which is a dictionary resource that I really enjoy, but I think that they all get equity definition's wrong because somewhere in there they bring in more loaded terms such as fairness and impartiality. And equity, by definition, even though I'm not giving a concise one, is not necessarily fair in everyone's eyes. And so to explain that is to understand the bigger picture and the longer historical picture versus the singular short-term picture that might be in front of you. And so to illustrate that, I oftentimes I grew up running track. And so like when the Olympics were last being shown, my kids were asking all kinds of questions because there's one event. If there are events that are happening, it's track and field that I have the TV on, and the kids notice the staggered lanes in a 400 meter. And one of my daughters asked the question, why is she all the way up here and she's all the way down here? And she asked the fantastic question, how is that fair? And it just turned into this longer discussion of helping her understand the distance around the track is the same if they are staggered, but it is not if they all are in the same starting place. Wait, help me understand. Because, and then, then it turned into a math discussion, but it was helping them understand if all the runners started at the same place at that same exact time, then the people who are on the outside are actually running a longer distance. Yes. That would be unfair. Yes. So we have to show partiality to the person who's on the outside lane in order to even the starting places, so to speak. Lots of analogies can be built from there about understanding, our society as a whole and meritocracy, and we can go deep in it from there. But understanding that equity gives everyone who's participating what they need at that time, and it's based on the longer arc, not just the short look. Yes. And the statement that I make in my book is, if you start with equity, you will get empathy. But if you, quote, start with equity due to your bias, you may miss equity. So start with equity. So if you do utilize a process that has an E as the first starting point, make it equity.
I love that. Wow.
Yeah.
You have a great way of explaining all of this. I mean, truly, and I know that our audience is going to appreciate it because I do. I feel like I learn from you all the time. I have been learning from you.
Appreciate that.
But today's conversation really, if you're going to start with an E word, start with equity, like that's incredible. I'm kind of speechless.
Yep. Well, and to know that takes work. Right? To know that takes work. Like, I didn't give you an easy solution. No. Like, oh, okay, now that was easy. Let's just start with equity. And then it's like, wait, now we have to define equity. You have to understand equity. We have to understand all the circumstances that make certain situations impartial for others and unfair for others. Like, it takes a lot. That is a wrestle in and of itself, but it's a worthy one.
Absolutely.
Which again, though, I think that if we share our power and we share the space with those who are most proximate to whatever pain that we are trying to solve, equity is sort of, I'm not going to say fully, but it's sort of built in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Because their perspectives are present.
Yes.
We have to still rein in ourselves from trying to control.
Yes.
Right? Because we can.
Yes.
If we're facilitating this, it's my process. It's my room. It's my space. You were here by my invitation. Oh, wow. I actually wield a ton of power. So I have to humble myself 4 or 5 steps lower than I am even aware of to maybe get closer to helping the room understand this is your space.
Wow. That's so good, Dee. That's so good. You've mentioned a book, and I'm going to hop over to this question. So you've just segued into your new book, which is really what I want to talk about next. I know based on some of my research that it took you 2 years from beginning to end to write this book. So I want to know, what's the name of the book? Why did you write this book? What is your hope for those that are going to read this book?
Yes, it took me 2 years and some change. And there's a big reason why, because I started it in 2020. I'll just
Yes.
let that sit, right?
Yes.
So a book that may have taken me a year in other years to write took me a full two, because it was I felt like I was under constant attack emotionally, environmentally, and I wasn't just writing things about yesteryear. I was writing things that were happening like the week of, and a lot of pain was expressed, especially in the second half of the book. Because the first half of the book, I sort of give a lot of perspective around, like a lot of what we've talked about is the first half of the book. The second half of the book was really going into some of the particulars of particular topics. And if you were to just start with this as a topic, okay, let's unpack that. So it took a while. But once it started to formulate, things started to, at least from an outline perspective, really felt good. And that was to say, I am going to let the reader know these are the same questions I am asking as I attempt to answer them. And I want you, reader, who I am targeting educators broadly, to feel the freedom to create your own questions in response to what I'm writing. And so the title of Demarginalizing Design came up really much like I fought over a title for a while, but Jacqueline Whiting, who was my main reviewer, when I say reviewer, she was the only person who sort of read every single word that I wrote from start to end, and her reactions in the margins is what really kept cheering me on to keep writing. And then I called on other friends who are also educators, who I know are also highly invested in the particular topics in which I was writing about, and asked each of them to review one chapter. And again, some gave me lots of feedback on like confusing statements, some on grammatical errors. They're still there. I still have grammar errors. I'm still fixing them. Nonetheless, they were cheering me on, right? I would see their reactions. Natasha Michelle, you're like, boy, you better say it, written in the margins. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna keep writing because she just said that. Ken, man, I read, he and I talked, Ken Shelton and I talked, man, I read this, and next thing you know, we're in a long conversation. So the people who were reading the parts, Dr. Sosin Jaber, she said so many things that made me think, okay, I think I wrote something that's worth writing. So now I think it's worth, publicizing it. And I really want the readers to, like I said, interact with me. And I know that there are some books that do that, but this is an open invitation to that. So intentionally, the margins are a little bit wider than most book margins, because I want them to have room to write.
Sure.
And I give several invitations to tweet me, to interact with me on a Flipgrid, to hold conversation with me.
Yes.
And whether that is for gaining deeper understanding, I'm happy to be a part of that, but more so to help me gain better understanding. So maybe it's on something that I said that needs more perspective that I can be informed by. I need to learn from the community. And so I've intentionally made it sort of a community book, and there will be multiple iterations in the future. I guarantee it, because people will make it that. They will demand that it's that. And again, shout out to David Clifford. He kind of pushed me when he knew that he's seen Solve in Time, he's seen some of its iterations, and he asked the question, how did that come about? And I was like, I know what you're asking. You're asking me, why am I not brave enough just to put it out there and to see what people say and to make iterations over time? So it's really for the educator to recognize their need to gather the people who are most proximate to the pain within whatever their setting is, and to listen well. And in that, I give them some more of my perspective and understanding, educationally and experientially, to try and help them understand at least another voice but I want to constantly push them to go and find and listen to the voices of others who could give them a better perspective. And it doesn't matter if I tell you, these are the stats, these are the figures, you can combat me. But if you start listening to the people that you aim to serve and they tell you, then you have a decision to make. Are you going to listen or are you going to ignore?
Wow.
Are you going to continue to push them in the margins, or are you going to demarginalize by listening to them and co-designing solutions with them?
Wow. I mean, a couple of things here. You're so courageous, first of all, to put together this book that really, like you've said before, is a community experience and kind of leading people along to have this conversation, to ask the questions, to be vulnerable with you. And you're even saying, I'm ready to learn with you, right? You're not writing a book going, well, I know everything there is to know about this, and everything I put in black and white is concrete, right? Like, that is courage right there, Dee. Really courageous. And so I commend you on that. I also love, I know you name dropped some people, but I did happen to see your outline to see who your reviewers were. And I'll just tell everybody listening, he had some incredible reviewers. So just know that. And how incredible to have those cheerleaders on your sidelines. Let me just say that too.
Friends and family. That's what they are. Friends and family.
Yes.
And they weren't style editors. They weren't grammatical editors. They were stop me in my tracks if I am saying something crazy, people, right? Like, this is what you really dive into. What do you think about this? Am I off here? I know I have my experience. I know I have my education, but you have counters to this. And most feedback was very much like, hey, you might want to explain this a little bit deeper, right? Don't forget about, right? They were cheering me on, even with minor quote corrections. They were really cheering me on. And it reminded me of what I think I would have enjoyed much more as a student, receiving feedback from an educator. If you know that that teacher is on your team, right? This person is wanting to bring out the best in you, not they're there to critique you and to tell you how terrible it is and about how you need to improve it, or else, right? The consequence being a lower grade. Much different, much different.
I think that's
so. I'm afraid. I'm afraid someone's going to read.
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid.
No, someone's going to read my book. There'll be multiple people that'll read my book with that critical eye for the critique sake. And I'm a real person.
Wow. We've been talking for an hour now. And I truly know this. You and I could probably go for another hour. But I'm going to transition us into some fun quick fire questions.
Okay.
Now, those of you that are listening or watching, Dee does not know about these questions I'm about to ask him. So,
nope.
They're going to be quick fire. Hopefully you're going to find some humor in some of them and we can end on a fun note. So my first question is,
I'm nervous. Let's go.
I'm a little nervous too. Okay.
I'm that emoji, that face. I'm that emoji right now.
Or the new emojis that have come out, the melting like person.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
In one word, describe Peeps.
Did you see my Twitter? I put this out there.
Yes.
Disgusting.
Yes, I have to agree with you. I do think it's a pretty controversial topic. But when I saw your tweet, I was like, this is how I know Dee and I can actually be friends, because I too do not love Peeps. And with that, we are actually giving away a book. So the very first person that can tweet how Dee Lanier describes Peeps and use the hashtag. So you have to use both hashtags, hashtag Demarginalizing Design and hashtag Wakelet Wave. You will win a copy of Dee's book.
Wait, let's make it a little bit more challenging.
Okay.
It is disgusting. DEE.
Yes.
Disgusting.
Has to be spelled that way. DEE. No, I saw that and I was like, yes. Meanwhile, after I saw your tweet, my daughter was eating Peeps, and I was like, I cannot believe that I birthed you.
Yeah, the next day, my daughter gets 4 packs of sweets from her
Yes.
grandmother, and she's excited about it. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yes. I just will never understand that. So I had to put that question in here. Nobody else will ever get that quick fire question, Dee, just you. Okay, next quick fire question.
Oh gosh.
What is the most rewarding thing about writing a book?
The most rewarding thing. It's having people read it and to respond and react. I have a few people who have, uh, like I said before, have read chapters.
Mhm.
I have a few people who have preview copies, and their reactions, their encouragement, the the conversation. I will say that's it. It's the
Yes.
conversation that is ongoing as a result of writing the book. That is
Yes.
by far the most rewarding.
Okay. What's one concert you'll never forget?
This comes to mind because I went to a concert with Kirk Franklin, and it was outdoors. I've been to a couple of his concerts, but it was an outdoor concert, and they were 50,000 people. And this dude had everyone in the palm of his hand. So he'd say, now stop. And everybody'd stop. And then he'd say, jump. And 50,000 people are jumping. And it was outdoors and it was on grass, but some of the grass was like big dirt spots. So, like, just billows of dirt is up in the air. And I'm like, this dude has us doing whatever he tells us to do. Just that amount of energy and being in an outdoor space, Myrtle Beach, Kirk Franklin, just controlling the stage. That was unbelievable to me.
That's awesome. Okay. Fill in the blank here. Blank is essential for preparing students for success beyond the classroom.
Well, I'm gonna say critical thinking. I want to go a little bit deeper in it, and I think of critical thinking in the Paulo Freire way.
Mhm.
So it's not just by yourself; it's with others. It's
Mhm.
conversational critical thinking.
Mhm.
If you're familiar with the 4 C's, they are two inextricably connected. You have to
Yes.
have critical thinking with others.
Yes. Yes. Okay. The last question. If you have to watch one TV show or movie every day for the rest of your life, what are you going to be watching?
Oh gosh. This one, if it's a movie, it's Friday. Because I know every line and I'll just keep on repeating it. If
Yes.
there's one movie,
Yes.
if there's one TV show though, that's a toughie. I'd have to think on that one for a little bit. I'd have to be like, what era are we talking? Can we take it to eras? I'd have to narrow it down.
Yes.
But any era, anytime, give me Friday, and I will definitely be laughing.
I love it. I love
And
it.
you know
That's
this,
awesome.
man.
Yes. That was actually going to be another question, and I did not highlight that one. But which movie can you quote all the way through? That also was probably your answer, right?
Simple
Um,
answer.
so we have our giveaway. So if you were listening, make sure you listen to how we wanted you to tweet out to get Dee's new book. Also, where can they find this book, Dee?
Well, depending on when this releases, it will be available on Amazon.
Okay.
It is currently available on my website at solveintime.com for pre-order, and I'm doing autographed copies there. And in the future, I'll do only bundled copies on my website, but Amazon will be the place. And then by second edition, because I'm already thinking it's going to come, you should be able to find it in places like Barnes and Noble.
I love it. And where can we find you?
You can find me. The best way to interact with me, if you want to have a conversation with me, it'll happen on Twitter. So at Dee Lanier, DeeLanier, not hard to find. Find me on Twitter. I will holla back. And more than just finding me, I give this invitation all the time. I would love to be zoomed into any classroom. I would love to Google Meet, Team, whatever the thing is. If I can just be a fly on the wall as you facilitate a solve in time session or something that you know is a part of my passions, I want to be there just to enjoy the experience.
I love that. Thank you so much for just sharing for this short amount of time, Dee. It honestly has been such an honor and a pleasure hearing from you today. Is there any last words you want to share with those listening or watching?
It is a thank you that comes from really my heart, in that I think that if you've listened to this very long, but hopefully very informative conversation between the two of us, um, thank you for listening. You've clearly been patient. I would imagine you've been humble, and I hope that you've been incredibly curious and that you continue to be so. And I would love to dialogue with you more.
I love that. Thank you all for joining us. If you're interested in watching any more podcasts from Wakelet, go to www.wakelet.com/at the Wakelet podcast. You also can follow Wakelet on all social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. I think I got YouTube. We're out there. Follow Dee. Make sure you support Dee. Interact with him on Twitter, and we will see you next time.